In the last two videos, we spoke about some basic topics around classes that for the most part are probably going to be at least a little bit familiar if you have covered ES 2015 before. So now we're going to start to discuss some of the differences between ES 2015 classes and classes in Typescript. So the first thing we're going to cover is the existence of something called modifiers. Modifiers are keywords that we can place on different methods and properties inside of a class. The different options are public, private, and protected. The goal of these different modifiers is to restrict access to different functions or different variables. By default, every different method and property that we add to a class is always going to have the public modifier on it. Now, the reason I say by default is that right now you'll notice that we don't have anything that looks like public, private, or protected inside of our class. So because we did not add anything or any of those modifiers inside of here, it is assumed that these are all currently public. So what does it mean to actually be public? Well, it means that a given method or property, because we can add a modifier on a property as well, but we'll discuss that in a little bit, it means that method can be called anywhere, anytime. It's easiest to understand what public means if we then look first at private and protected. If a method is marked as private, it means that that method can only be called by other methods in the exact same class definition. If a method is marked as protected, it means it can be called by other methods in that class and by other methods in child classes as well. By far, the easiest way to understand all this is to just write out code samples. So let's do that right now. So right now, back inside of my editor, I'm going to add on the public modifier to all three of these different methods you see. So I'm going to say public, public, public. By doing so, I have changed absolutely nothing inside of my code. Again, by default, all these different modifiers are considered to be public. So in general, it's only when we start to add on different modifiers like protected or private that we're going to see any difference. Let's try marking the drive method right here as private to get started. So I'm going to add on the private modifier to that. As soon as I do so, you're going to see an error appear on car.drive. It says property drive is private and only accessible within class car. So that means that we can never call this method from outside of this class. Only methods inside this class can actually call drive. So let's say, for example, that we add a new method to this thing called start driving process. And I'm going to have that with a return type of void. This method right here, because it is inside of class car, can safely call the drive method by referring to this.drive like so. So now down here on car.drive, rather than calling car.drive, we could instead call start driving process. We can safely call start driving process because it does not have the private modifier on it. And start driving process can safely call drive, even though drive is marked as private, because it is inside of the same class. Now you'll notice we've got a little error right here. If you hover over it, we're seeing this error because we have added in a new property, or we've modified a property in class car that is also existing inside of vehicle as well. But in vehicle, our definition up here, drive is marked as public. So the error here is that we've got a child class that has a different modifier than the parent class. If we ever are overriding a method, as we are right here, we cannot change the modifier in the child class. So in this example, if we remove private like so, that error will go away. However, if vehicle did not have that method at all, we are no longer overriding it inside of car, and so now we can successfully add on private like so. Okay, so again, we're going to use private whenever we want to restrict access to a function. Now, here's the really important thing. Like, why do we care about this, right? That's the real important definition. The first thing I want to tell you and make extremely clear is that we do not mark methods as being private over any type of security concern around like being hacked or something like that, or having some malicious user. When you define a method as being private, we are not adding in any layer of application security. The only reason to mark something as private is to restrict the different methods that other developers can call. And the reason we want to do that is if we might have a method that very deeply manipulates a class, and maybe there's some like really complicated special way to use it. And maybe you and I don't trust other developers to call that method safely. If other developers call a given method, they might just inadvertently break something inside of our application. And so if that's the case, if we have some method that we just don't want other developers to call because it's very likely they're going to break something, we will mark it as being private. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at private, let's also discuss what protected does. So protected is just like private. The only difference is that with protected, we can access the given method in child classes as well. So for example, let's go back up to vehicle right here. Rather than saying that honk is going to be public, let's mark it as private really quickly. And then let's say that when we start the driving process, we're not only going to do a drive, but we'll also do a honk. Like so. So when we try to call honk, our class is going to automatically try to call this method. But because this thing is marked as private and is in a parent class, we are not allowed to do so. So honk is only accessible within vehicle. If we still actually really wanted to call honk, even though it's inside of a parent class, we could mark it as protected. So now the child class can access that method, but it cannot be accessed by anywhere outside of that child class. So for example, if we now made an instance of vehicle right here, so const vehicle is new vehicle, we would not be allowed to call honk. If I try to do so, we'll very quickly see an error message once again. Okay, so that's the basics of modifiers. So we've now taken a look at basics of classes, methods, a very tiny bit around inheritance, and modifiers as well. So quick pause right here, and we're going to start to cover fields in the next section. So I'll see you in just a minute.